So when you think about American history, you probably picture big battles and famous speeches, right? But what if I told you the real story, the actual source code of the nation, is hidden in something that sounds kind of boring? Acts of Congress. Seriously. Every law from way back in the 18th century to right now is like a line of code that is built, sometimes broken, and then rebuilt this country. So let's get into it and see how that actually works.
And look, I get it. It's a totally fair question. We hear about it on the news all the time, right? Congress passes a bill, the president signs it, but it can all feel so distant, so abstract. Why should you, in your actual day-to-day life, really care about any of this stuff?
Well, if you feel that way, you are definitely not alone. There's a legal scholar, Brian K. Landsberg, who put it perfectly. He basically said that for a lot of us, the connection between these big, formal laws and our own lives, or the lives of our family and friends, it just seems kind of blurry, abstract. Well, today, our goal is to bring that connection into super sharp focus for you.
All right, so to really see that connection, first we have to get our heads around the massive scale of this change over time. I mean, we're talking about a government that started out as this tiny, distant thing and became something whose laws are woven into pretty much everything we do. And the best way to see it? It all starts with the numbers.
Just think about it like this. Back in 1789, the very first U.S. Congress, their main job was just setting up the basics, the absolute machinery of government. For the average person, it was a pretty far-off idea. But today, phew, federal law touches, well, almost everything. Your bank account, your job, the food you buy, the car you drive, it's everywhere.
And to see this change in action, you just got to look at the data. In its very first year, 1789, the first Congress passed a grand total of 27 laws. Just 27. I mean, that's a small, totally manageable number for a country just getting on its feet.
Okay, but now, let's fast forward to just one single year, 2002. The 107th Congress passed over 260 acts. That's almost 10 times the output in just 1 year. The scale is just completely different.
And it's not just the number of laws. We can look at it by sheer volume, too. So picture this. If you took all the laws from the entire first 10 years of Congress and put them in a book, you'd have about 755 pages.
Okay, but remember that 1 year, 2002? That single year produced over 3,000 pages of law. That is more than 4 times the volume of the entire first decade, all crammed into 1 year. The scope has just exploded. So it begs the question, right? What are all these laws actually doing?
Okay, let's zoom in on our first big example to see how this all works. Right at the beginning, these laws, they weren't just a bunch of rules. No, they were the actual blueprints for the country. They were literally building the nation's bones from scratch. Let's take the Judiciary Act of 1789. This thing wasn't just some paper with suggestions on it. It was the detailed architectural plan that created the entire federal court system. You know, the Supreme Court, circuit courts, district courts, the whole shebang. With this one single act, Congress literally spoke the third branch of government into existence. Wow.
But here's the thing. Laws aren't always about building things up. Sometimes they become the actual battleground where a nation's deepest, darkest conflicts play out. For this, we got to look at the decades just before the Civil War.
Okay, consider the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. This was a huge deal because this law didn't just stay in the South. No, it reached all the way into free states, places like Massachusetts and Ohio, and it legally forced their citizens to participate in capturing people who had escaped slavery. It took what was a regional conflict and exploded it into a national crisis.
So you see, this wasn't just some abstract political debate happening far away in Washington. These were federal laws that reached right down into local communities and literally tore them apart. It forced regular people to make these impossible moral choices, and it just deepened the cracks that would eventually break the country in two.
And it didn't stop there. 4 years later, you get the Kansas-Nebraska Act. On the surface, it sounded democratic, I guess. It let settlers in new territories decide for themselves about slavery. But the result? Chaos. Pro- and anti-slavery groups flooded into Kansas, and it led to this brutal, violent conflict that history calls Bleeding Kansas. I mean, you can draw a straight line from that act of Congress to actual bloodshed.
So it just makes you stop and think, right? What happens when laws, the very thing that's supposed to hold a country together, become the tool that's used to tear it apart?
Okay, let's jump way forward in time now, to the 20th century. Because in the aftermath of the Great Depression, the whole purpose of federal law just changed dramatically. It wasn't just about setting up government or settling fights anymore. Suddenly, it became a tool for actively shaping the entire economy and creating a social safety net for millions of people.
I mean, just look at this absolute flurry of activity during the New Deal. We're talking about a few short years where you get one landmark law after another, completely reshaping the American economy and the government's place in it. Everything from regulating banks to creating these massive public works projects, it was a whirlwind.
And the legacy from that time? It's just immense. Social Security, the insurance on your bank account, the rules for the stock market, protections for labor unions. So many things we take for granted today, these were all born from those acts of Congress back then, creating this new safety net and a whole framework that still affects pretty much all of us.
So let's just pause for a second. We've seen laws that literally build the government. We've seen laws that tear a nation apart. And we've seen laws that totally redefine the relationship between the government and the people. Which of course brings us to the big takeaway here. Here's the most important thing to remember from all this. Acts of Congress, they're like the DNA of American history. Seriously. Each one is a recorded decision, a little snapshot in time that tells you exactly what the country valued, what it was afraid of, and where it thought it was going at that very moment. And that's exactly why trying to understand them is so crucial. It brings us back to what that scholar Landsberg was saying. The goal is to kind of decode all this complex technical language, because when you do that, you realize you're not just reading law, you're reading the actual story of America.
So that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. If every law that gets passed is just another line of code being added to our national story, what is the code that's being written right now telling us? What does it say about who we are today and who we're becoming?